In the stillness of a spring dawn, in the year 1623, the corridors of Topkapi Palace shivered with a sound no one dared to name. It was not the clash of steel, nor the cry of a wounded soldier. It was the piercing scream of a girl, 15 years old, daughter of the mightiest ruler on earth, Princess Fatma Sultan. Her cry seemed to slice through the marble like a blade, a cry so raw and terrifying that even the palace guards, men who had faced battlefields drenched in death, froze in place. They looked at one another, uncertain, unwilling to intervene, for they knew this moment was forbidden to all eyes. What unfolded that night was not a private misfortune nor a family tragedy. It was a ritual, a carefully constructed ceremony masked as honor, but in truth, a shattering ordeal carried out against every Ottoman princess for centuries. History painted them in silks and jewels, living in luxury within gilded halls. But beneath the glowing surface of empire lay a darker current, a current so powerful, so devastating, that generations of royal daughters grew up fearing one night above all others, their wedding night. To understand why, we must walk with Fatma Sultan through the corridors of Topkapi, through the veiled chambers of the imperial harem, and into a world where silence was law and obedience was carved into the very soul. For 600 years, this truth was hidden, scrubbed from official chronicles, sealed in archives, and wrapped in ceremony. Yet whispers survived, carried in forgotten manuscripts, and in the tremors of lives erased. And now, centuries later, we stand at the threshold of a truth too long buried. The Ottoman Empire stretched vast and unyielding, its shadow falling across 3 continents, from the smoking deserts of Arabia to the frozen plains of Hungary. Its armies thundered, its sultans commanded, and its wealth gleamed brighter than any crown in Europe. The empire's heart, Istanbul, pulsed with power, its palaces, symbols of divine authority. And at the very center of this glittering jewel stood the imperial harem, a place shrouded in myths and fantasies. To outsiders, it was whispered of as paradise, a world of perfumes, music, and beauty. But to those within, it could be a labyrinth of ambition, betrayal, and silent despair. In the early 1600s, the era later known as the Sultanate of Women, power itself flowed through the hands of certain royal consorts and mothers. Women like Kosem Sultan could shape wars, dethrone sultans, and guide the destiny of an empire. But while these women of cunning and influence carved their names into history, the daughters of the dynasty faced a far harsher reality. Unlike concubines, who clawed their way upward through ambition and charm, princesses of royal blood were not permitted such choices. Their fates were sealed the moment they drew their first breath. They were bargaining chips, living offerings to bind alliances, pacify uprisings, or reward loyalty. And for each of them, their first step into this role came with the same dread. Princess Fatma Sultan, daughter of Sultan Ahmed I, and the formidable Kosem Sultan, was born into beauty and brilliance. She was a child prodigy, a girl who read astronomy under the stars, debated philosophy with scholars, and mastered languages with an elegance that left even her tutors in awe. Her eyes turned upward to the heavens, searching for truths beyond marble walls. But the cruelest truth was one she could never escape. No matter her gifts, her destiny had been written for her. She would be given in marriage not for love, not for choice, but for power. and the man chosen for her was no gentle companion. He was Kara Mustafa Pasha, a hardened commander, decades her senior, a man whose loyalty to the throne was his greatest virtue. For Mustafa, the marriage was a triumph. For Fatma, it was the end of herself. Months before her wedding, Fatma was forced into the ritual preparation known as Terbiye-i Mubarak, the so-called sacred education. It was a process designed not to elevate her, but to break her, overseen by the head of the harem, a woman named Gulnar Hatun. Fatma was stripped of her identity piece by piece. From dawn until dusk, she was drilled in gestures of obedience, in bows, and postures meant to remind her of submission at every moment. Even her walk was no longer her own. Steps measured, head tilted at an exact angle, hands never raised higher than her heart. But the most cruel part was her voice, her vast vocabulary, her eloquence, her wit, reduced to only a handful of permitted words, expressions of gratitude, phrases of apology, humble requests, nothing more. Each slip, each attempt to speak beyond these boundaries was met with punishment, days of silence, fasting, humiliation. Slowly, the girl who once dreamed of the stars was being rewritten into a shadow. And the rituals did not end there. Beneath the palace, hidden from all but a chosen few, Fatma was taken to chambers built for one purpose: rehearsals of the night to come. Here, she was forced to enact ceremonies with lifeless figures, wax mannequins, crafted with unsettling realism. Her tears, her trembling, her resistance were all noted, recorded, studied. Each reaction was weighed against the expectations of obedience. The more she fought, the harsher the conditioning. It was not merely her body that was being prepared, but her spirit that was being reshaped, bent, and silenced. In the final weeks before her wedding, Fatma was moved into the Gelin Koshku, the bride's pavilion. Isolated from the world, she was surrounded by silks and perfumes, but every detail of her existence was controlled. What she ate, how she bathed, even the air she breathed was calculated to mold her into compliance. Mirrors lined the walls, forcing her to watch herself constantly, turning the ancient practice of reflection into a weapon of self-surveillance. Day after day, she saw not the girl who loved the stars, but the obedient bride she was commanded to become. Outside, the empire prepared for a celebration. Processions filled the streets, music rose into the night, and the people rejoiced in what they believed was the joyous union of power and beauty. But inside those silken walls, Fatma Sultan sat in silence, her gaze vacant, her body trembling with a fear no words could capture. Doctors recorded her breath coming shallow, her hands trembling as if caught in an unseen storm. To the world, she was a princess stepping into her destiny. To herself, she was a prisoner stepping into her grave. And when the day finally came, March 15th, 1623, the empire celebrated with feasts, with fireworks, with glory. Yet as the city rejoiced, Fatma was led to a chamber built not for love, but for surrender, an octagonal pavilion, each level designed to strip away her last fragments of self. Baths infused with oils meant to numb her spirit, dresses weighted to restrain her movement, walls draped with images of conquest, reminding her that she too was to be conquered. At last, she was led to the final chamber. The door closed behind her. The empire outside fell into silence, and inside, a girl who once dreamed of the stars faced the night she had feared since the moment of her birth. The scream that tore from her lips would echo through the palace for generations, though history would try to silence it. But that was only the beginning. To understand what happened in that chamber and how Fatma Sultan's life unraveled after that night, you must follow me deeper into the shadows of the imperial palace. What began as one girl's cry would become a pattern repeated across centuries, a ritual so sinister it scarred the very daughters of the empire itself. The doors of the pavilion had closed. Outside, the empire celebrated with fire and music, but within those walls, silence reigned. The young princess, once radiant with curiosity, once alive with dreams of distant stars, now stood trembling, her fate sealed not by choice but by empire. Records from the palace archives describe what followed in clinical, detached words, but even between the lines, you can sense the horror. Physicians noted her collapse, her trembling, her breath shallow, her eyes fixed as if gazing beyond the walls into another world. They gave it a name, Shakma, the shock of the spirit, a state in which the mind flees the body to survive what the body cannot endure. Kara Mustafa Pasha, her husband by decree, had been taught to assert a dominance, instructed in methods meant to leave no space for resistance. But what he encountered was not defiance, it was absence. Fatma Sultan's body remained, but her soul had retreated far beyond his reach. What transpired in that chamber was recorded not as triumph, but as collapse, a ritual fulfilled only in the coldest sense of duty. For the empire, it was enough. For Fatma, it was the beginning of her undoing. In the days that followed, palace attendants described her as changed. The vibrant girl who once debated scholars now spoke only in whispers and only when directly addressed. Her appetite vanished, forcing servants to feed her as one would feed a child. Hours passed with her seated motionless, tears streaming without reason, her silence broken only by sudden fits of weeping that left her trembling. Doctors of the time called it virginal melancholy, a phrase that barely conceals the reality. She had been broken in spirit. Her fear grew so profound that even the presence of men she had once trusted, guards, attendants, eunuchs, was enough to send her into shivering panic. What the empire considered preparation had left her with wounds no medicine, no ritual, no prayer could heal. The brilliance that once lit the palace corridors had dimmed to a shadow. And yet, despite this devastation, her role continued. Fatma Sultan remained a princess, a wife, and later a mother. Publicly, she was seen at ceremonies, wrapped in silks, her posture perfect, her silence taken for dignity. Privately, she lived as a ghost, her days marked by emptiness. Her husband, Kara Mustafa Pasha, would go on to fight campaigns and pursue power, yet even his own records hint at unease. Some historians suggest he drowned his conscience in opium, unable to reconcile duty with the destruction of the girl entrusted to him. But for Fatma, there was no refuge, no escape. For 29 years she endured, until her death in 1652 at the age of 46. The official record listed a fever, but the date, falling on the anniversary of her wedding night, spoke of a truth no one dared write, and Fatma's tragedy was not unique. Whispers from the archives revealed dozens of princesses marked by the same fate. Some faded into silence, like Fatma, speaking only when commanded. Others fell into madness, their names erased from records. A few were said to have disappeared altogether, their lives swallowed by the machinery of empire. And when such vanishings occurred, the chronicles grew vague, wrapped in euphemisms and ornate phrases that hid the suffering beneath ceremony. Yet fragments survived, secret codes written by sisters to one another, records of princesses who faked death to escape remarriage, rare petitions sent directly to the sultan, begging for release. In these fragments, we glimpse sparks of resistance, women raised for surrender, daring to whisper no into the silence. Their courage, however small, survived the centuries, reminders that even in the deepest darkness, defiance can flicker. And here, I ask you, before we go further, before the last veil is lifted, pause for a moment. If Fatma Sultan's story has unsettled you, if the silence of these forgotten voices echoes within you, then I invite you to join this journey. Subscribe, not for me, but for them, for every hidden truth history tried to bury. With your voice, we can continue uncovering what lies behind gilded walls, what shadows live behind palaces of gold, because Fatma's cry was not the only one. It was simply the one that left enough of a trace to be heard across time. The Ottoman princesses were imagined by the world as the most fortunate women alive, yet their lives tell us something far darker, that absolute power can consume even its own children. The palace was not only a place of luxury, but a theater of suffering, where alliances were secured at the cost of human souls. Think of it, while the empire thundered across continents, while victories and conquests were sung in the streets, inside the harem, young girls were quietly unmade, their spirits reshaped into silence. The fairy tales told of princesses surrounded by riches. The truth was a lineage of daughters bound by invisible chains. Fatma Sultan Aurdiva's story forces us to ask a question. How many other secrets lie buried in the archives of the past? What hidden rituals scarred the courts of Europe, Russia, China? How many queens, consorts, or princesses carried silent wounds erased by ceremony? The truth is this: the empire preserved itself not only through armies and treaties, but through sacrifices carved into its own bloodline. And those sacrifices were not faceless. They were girls, brilliant, curious, full of dreams, broken into instruments of obedience. When Fatma died, her books remained untouched, her instruments gathering dust. The gardens she once walked in silence bloomed without her, and her story, like so many others, was softened, erased, disguised as ceremony. For centuries, the world saw only the glittering mask. It is only now, through uncovered records and forgotten manuscripts, that the cracks in that mask allow us to glimpse the truth. And so we return to that morning in 1623, when a scream tore through the marble of Topkapi Palace. That cry was more than a moment of pain. It was the sound of a system echoing through time, a ritual repeated across generations. It was the sound of a girl vanishing into silence. The empire may have hidden it, history may have dressed it in silks and jewels, but if we listen carefully, we can still hear it. And once heard, it cannot be unheard. Now, I turn to you. Knowing this truth, knowing what lay behind the fairy tale of Ottoman princesses, how does it change the way you imagine history? Do you hear Fatma scream as an echo of one girl, or as the cry of countless forgotten voices? Tell me in the comments, and together we will decide whose hidden story must be revealed next.